After our debut loss, having finished 11th out of 12 horses, my trainer Buster and I were not devastated, but rather excited. This was due to how our filly, Rigid Mind, had finished down the stretch. I had found her to have rocket power, that if I had only triggered moments sooner, she may have closed the gap and won, leaving us celebrating. Instead, we target her second race, in Washington, D.C., 3 weeks from now. This will give her time to properly recuperate after the taxing she endured from her debut. For the next couple weeks before heading to DC, I mainly hang around with Buster as he helps Rigid Mind recuperate and prepare for her next race. He has rented out space at a large stable which boards several other horses. All during the week, I begin to notice someone else not far from Rigid Mind, always coincidentally just hanging about. I recognize him from the track. I would see him early in the morning, studying the horses in the field, or up in the bleachers, licking his pencil and recording his secret observations in his notepad. His name is Penn Bowie, and he is a horseman, one of the premier odds makers in the region. The bookman who sets the morning lines for the tracks and casinos all across the western states. So why is he hanging around our stable? And why does he seem to be rather interested in our filly? It isn't until after we board our train with Rigid Mind and after we arrive in DC that I would discover his motives. Shortly after arriving at the track on race day, I pick up a racing form and look at the rundown. There is my answer to Mr. Bowie's curiosity. He has set the odds for Rigid Mind as one of the favorites. But why would Mr. Bowie think a horse who debuted at the back of the pack now be a main contender in this, her second race? He was not seated atop her in the last race, so he could not have felt the surge of power that she unleashed beneath me in those final furlongs. But from his seat high in the grandstand, he may have seen her close the gap. That, and he was snooping around the stables the whole week before we left. He has one of the most trained eyes in the horse racing business, and he seems to think our filly can win. That leaves me excited, yet nervous, as I must race her properly. He set us as a favorite at almost 5-1, and only placed one horse above us at 4-1. Warm Moon, the number 10 horse, would be our primary competition for this race according to Penn Bowie. And when I find out who owns Warm Moon, the stakes grow even higher. Before I became a racehorse owner, the closest I had gotten to Hilary Getty was when I would pass one of his cars in the parking lot of the racetrack. He would be watching his horses run from inside the exclusive owners club, while I would head off to the grandstands. After purchasing Rigid Mind and attending my first owner's social, I first crossed paths with Hilary. I was sipping a mint julep and turned just as Mr. Getty was passing by. He removed his handkerchief scarf with such pomp and vigor that it nearly blew me off my feet. He never turned around to apologize. I found out Buster had a past with Getty when we were walking near a training barn at the track, and I showed him a printout of the morning line. He immediately crumpled it to the ground, spat on it, then said,
"Say, I'll go get some road apples to bury it with!"
To the gamblers at the tracks, Getty's well known as a man who willfully manipulates the odds with his large wagers. To the owners, he's head of the class, admired. And as Buster simply describes him,
he's a toad! He's a noisy toad. And I'd sure like to stick it to him and his precious Warm Moon in the race later today.
It's a crisp and cool sunny afternoon as they load us into the starting gate. We drew the number 12 slot, so we're all the way at the end. Warm Moon whinnies nervously 2 stalls over in the number 10 slot, and atop her is Getty's jockey, a man named Harper, who sneers as I glance his way. Go! The buzzer rings, the gates swing open, and I'm a moment behind as the pack jumps out just ahead of us. This time, I let her run, and she keeps a good pace, just slightly behind the pack, close to where Buster wants us. As we hit the first turn, she is maintaining a nice slow pace, and seems to have a good reserve of stamina. We come out of the second turn towards the grandstands, and I know I'll have to send her soon. The pack of horses is spread out evenly across the track in front of us. The sign indicating 2 furlongs to go whizzes past, and I begin to call on her with the whip. She speeds up, but the others are calling on their horses as well. As the 1 furlong sign scrolls past, I'm running out of time. I call on her faster and faster, and she responds, closing the gap on the pack ahead and trying to find a seam to cut through them. Half a furlong to go as the other horses close in around her as she surges forward, trying to avoid being bumped. I pull her to the left and forward. It's too late. She's stuck, just behind the leaders, as the pack thunders past the finish line. A 6th place finish, and again, I feel that it was my fault. The way I rode her. She has more power under the hood, and I just need to maneuver her properly to win. 6th place, it reads as I look up at the glowing light bulbs on the scoreboard in the grandstands. Then, a smile crosses my lips as I look at the name of the jockey and horse just below mine. In 7th place, Harper, Warm Moon. Will all be if we didn't just lick Hillary Getty's prize filly. That night before we head back home, Buster and I hit the town and celebrate our small victory. Rigid Mind has finished twice as fast as her debut run, and we showed up Hillary Getty. A good omen it would seem. After the race, Buster says Rigid Mind needs to recuperate, but I want to strike while the iron's hot. After her first strong finish in only her 2nd race, I'm more certain than ever she can get a win. After looking over the upcoming races, Buster insists she can't run sooner than 2 weeks from now, up in San Francisco. Back at the home track, there's a lot of talk about this brash newcomer, that's me, defeating the equestrian king, Hillary Getty. Even if both our horses finished out of the top 3, it still captured the peanut gallery's attention. People like my old associate, Creek Dobson.
Say, Don, pretty brash what Rigid Mind did to Getty's filly back there in D.C.
Creek Dobson is a horseman and a gambler, who always seems to have one busted trifecta between himself and being rich. But since I've become an owner/rider, I've left my gambling ways behind. And so, a good portion of the time between races, we overheard small talk and innuendo regarding whether or not Getty would enter a horse into the upcoming race in San Francisco, and whether he would have his revenge and put that young, brash rider in his place. After boarding Rigid Mind and riding the train north, Buster and I arrive at Oakland Station. We then load up onto a ferry and kill time with a card game on the short trip across the bay to San Francisco. Arriving at the track, I begin to immediately scan the horses in their pre-race warm-up trots. One after the other strolls by, and yet I don't see the jockey Harper riding high. I look over the odds sheet, and sure enough, Getty's jockey is not listed. So, Getty chose not to race. But I'll bet my bottom dollar he's here, high above the dirt oval, secluded behind the mirrored glass of his skybox, observing my every movement atop Rigid Mind. It seems most fortuitous that we've drawn the number 1 gate slot. Not only that, but indeed Penn Bowie has set us as the flat-out favorite at almost even money. If I were still a gambling man, I would win only 40 cents on every dollar I bet on Rigid Mind. But Penn Bowie believes in our horse, which means he could see the strength in her that I could feel while in the saddle gliding down that home stretch. All the more pressure. We need to have our first win, and we need it here and now. They load us into the number 1 gate slot beneath a nice thick layer of scattered clouds. I breathe in deeply and smell the thick ocean marine layer. I tighten my leg's grasp and feel her quiver in anticipation. She shifts her weight. A series of snorts vibrates down the line towards the right of us.
Ready? Go!
Then the gate swings open. We launch from the slot in a perfect start, staying parallel to the group of runners as we glide along the white railing into the first turn. I remember Buster's advice.
Her nature is to stay right behind the leaders. Keep pace, then let her loose down the home stretch.
The most important thing is for me to maneuver her into a position where she can cut through the leaders when I do set her loose. But as I round the bend, we become boxed in against the rail and pushed slightly back. With a much longer race than previously, we've got a full loop to run. We settle in on the back stretch, and so far she seems to be running cool. A nice mid-pace, just where she needs to be. I call on her slightly and she responds. We accelerate through a bulk of the runners to just behind the leaders, just where we need to be.
Don't be afraid to bump and grind a little bit.
I remember Hilt's words as we accelerate and bump and grind our way right into third position. As the pack thunders down the home stretch, an open path lay before us. A light lather of sweat shines across Rigid Mind's back. She's good to go, and I call on her, over and over. As the final furlong speeds past us, she surges forward with confidence, splitting the remaining horses and galloping past the wire. First place. We have just won our first race, and everything is about to change.